Right, let's start with our Ask Me Anything sessions. This is a 5-minute slot where each of our ambassadors can ask the other whatever questions they like with no intervention from me whatsoever. So, Manuel, would you like to start with your Ask Me Anything?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I have a few questions that would lead basically to a conclusion or to a conviction whether Israel is serious about negotiations or not. First of all, I would like to ask the ambassador, how can he define the borders of Israel? We need to know the borders of Israel. That is very important. We Palestinians have defined our borders. We said 1967 lines, and anything else could be negotiated through land swap and what have you. The second question.
Should we start with that one?
If you want to have one by one or 5 questions and then you can answer. All right.
You have 5 minutes, so it's up to you how you use the 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So on the issue of borders, we believe that has to obviously be negotiated in the framework of the peace talks. Obviously, the expectation from the Palestinians towards us is that we be as flexible as we can on this issue. And I think the level of our ability to be flexible is dependent on what you give us on the issues that are important to us. In other words, if a Palestinian state is going to look like Hamas in Gaza and be very hostile and continue struggles and violence and hatred towards Israel, so we're not going to agree to be generous on the border issue. If, on the other hand, we're convinced that the day after it's real peace, real reconciliation, an end of all conflict, that the Palestinians finally accept the legitimacy of the Jewish state, then I think we can be more flexible on the borders. But that's an issue that has to be negotiated.
Well, actually, the question of borders is very important. Now, we talk about 1967 occupation. We cannot talk about the West Bank and not talk about East Jerusalem and Gaza. Now, when we say this is the state of Palestine, then if we engage in any political process, we're talking about the whole package. Whether Hamas or not is there, this is an internal problem where Palestinians...
You're looking at me. I'd like you to address Mark.
Well, okay. The question of Hamas is an internal problem. My problem is with the peace process with Israel. If Israel takes the peace process as legitimate as we have been, as Palestinians, I think let's look at the whole package of 1967. You have agreed and you have accepted in principle the 242, 338 resolutions. And we went to the Madrid peace process based on this political frame of reference. We signed the Oslo agreement based on this concept. Now, why with the building of settlements, you are trying to change the rules of the game here? We also have agreed in Camp David that if you agree that the borders are 1967, then any kind of land swapping should be part and parcel of the negotiations process. So we were not very rigid on the issue of total dismantlement of settlements. We said we could try to exchange that with something else. And that was the intention, when we went to Camp David and afterwards. But what we have seen on the ground is more settlements building, changing facts on the ground, making it impossible to make our geographic contiguity. And with the total blockade of Gaza, wars on Gaza is not helping the situation. Whether Hamas is an impediment or not, your chief negotiator is President Abbas. It's the authority, it's the PLO. Empower us to go to the negotiating table, and then the end result will be people will support what is best for them. And let the people vote and ratify. Also, Mr. Abbas said, after I clinch a deal with the Israelis, I'll go back to a referendum. So, a referendum means Hamas is a part and parcel of our society. They have to accept the victory or the defeat.
I would raise 2 things to that. You say that Hamas is an internal Palestinian issue, but it affects us very greatly. When we pulled out of Gaza and took down all the settlements and went back to the 1967 lines, the PA, Fatah, was still in charge of Gaza. Hamas took over. And of course, instead of having peace and reconciliation, we've had too many conflicts. Hamas refuses to accept the legitimacy of my country. Hamas believes in armed struggle. And when we have a stabbing in Jerusalem, Hamas's television says, yes, more, they encourage the killing of innocent civilians. And so for us, you can say, ignore this. This is an internal Palestinian issue. For us, it's a very real issue. If we were to pull out of parts of the West Bank and Hamas was to take over, it wouldn't be good for Israel. It wouldn't be good for the Palestinians, and it would definitely not be good for peace. So we have to think about what happens on the day after. We can't ignore that. On the issue of the 67 borders, I just want to remind one thing, and I think the listeners should know this. Were the 67 borders of peace? What happened between 1948 and 1967? Was there peace on those borders? On the contrary, Israel was attacked on those borders, both by terrorism and the whole June 67 border, when Nasser and the Arab world, they tried to destroy Israel in the 1967 borders. So the PLO, when it was established in 1964, did not accept the 67 borders. So to present the 67 borders as, that was a time when we lived in peace and harmony, that is, how will I say, an exaggeration.
Well, let me tell you something. I think you can argue this as much as you want, but you have to bear in mind that, since 1948, the Palestinian cause became an Arab cause. We did not have enough control over it. Now, regardless, who started the war, 1967 has been agreed by the international community that these are occupied territories. The United Nations have accepted the consequences of the 1948 war, which added to the partition plan to make it 78% of Palestine. So you talk about 22% left, and you believe in a two-state solution, and still you want to debate and to negotiate over the West Bank.
Well, your 5 minutes are up on that, but I just want to pick up.
It's only one question.
I know. I could see that was going to happen. Let me just pick you up. So you mentioned the blockade there. Why is this blockade still happening on Gaza? Because it seems to be one of the things that is really at the root of why the peace process can't be restarted.
I want to be clear. After we had an incident with the Turkish boat, the UN Secretary General sent a special investigation which looked at all the issues, and it found fault with Israel here and there, but it said the naval blockade on Gaza is legal under international law. They were very specific. And that is because Gaza is controlled by Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. That organization is receiving or trying to receive weapons from countries like Iran, so they can shoot rockets at Israeli civilians, and that we are, according to the UN report, authorized by the Secretary General, we are in our rights to prevent those shipments.
You may be within your rights, but do you not feel that most people in the international community look at this issue as a humanitarian issue, and they see Israel blockading Gaza, refusing to let in what most people would consider to be normal things that people need to live on, and that doesn't do your cause any good at all?
I would say that if people believe that, then it's an illusion. Israel is working energetically with the international community to facilitate humanitarian support for the people of Gaza. We've actually dramatically increased the number of trucks going in with produce and with goods for the people of Gaza Strip. We want to do even more. We've been talking to governments in Europe about the possibility of working with the Palestinian Authority together to expand the crossings to allow for greater volumes of produce to reach the people of Gaza. We don't see the people of Gaza as our enemy. On the contrary, we see them in many ways. I don't know if the professor will agree with me, but we see them also as victims of that Hamas regime, which is not a democratic regime. It's a very problematic regime. It's a terrorist regime.
But that regime, some people would say, is there partly because of Israeli actions. That the people there elected Hamas because they were so fed up with the actions of the Israeli government.
I would argue that that's very difficult to logically justify. You've seen Islamist parties. When you've had a period of dictatorship by an authoritarian secular regime throughout the Middle East and you open it up for elections, and we've seen this in North Africa, the Islamists were the best group to be organized and to win. So if it happens across North Africa, that's got nothing to do with us, but when it happens in Gaza, it's got everything to do with us.
Don't forget, you can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk or on Facebook Live on the LBC Facebook page. Another Twitter question. Is the British Labour Party a friend of Israel or a friend of Palestine? Manuel?
The English Labour Party, the British Labour Party, has two organizations. One, Labour Friends of Palestine and Labour Friends of Israel. So they have always maintained that kind of an equilibrium. So I wouldn't say that the Labour Party is pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel. No, by the same token, I mean, the same party has supports for the two.
But given the current leadership of the Labour Party, do you not think that it's become much more pro-Palestinian?
Well, you have to be more elaborate on this. If you want to talk about the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, yes, he comes from that background. But I mean, he does not
Have you met with him recently?
No, I haven't met him. Since he became the leader, I haven't met him. And he shunned talking about Palestine, I must say.
Mark Regev, I think last time we spoke, you were hoping to meet with Jeremy Corbyn. Has that meeting happened?
It did.
And how did it go?
I think it was a good meeting. But obviously he doesn't agree with me on all the issues.
That I think we can take as read.
I would say the following, though. If you look at the history of Labour in this country, you see a solid support for Zionism, for the Jewish state. The same year that the Balfour Declaration was published in 1917, Labour solidly endorses that position. Labour supported the creation of Israel, the creation of the Jewish state. And in fact, for many progressives in the 30s and the 40s of this century, Zionism was seen as an integral part of a progressive Labour socialist agenda because they saw a people who'd been suffering, a people that had been persecuted, the victims of racism and genocide, and they said, this people deserves independence and sovereignty.
But when you met Jeremy Corbyn, did he allay your fears? Because you presumably raised the issue of these anti-Semitic incidents within the Labour Party and social media. Did he allay your fears on that?
If an ambassador is going to do his job effectively, he has to be able to conduct meetings in a certain amount of confidence. And I don't
think it's asking you to breach a confidence. I mean, either he did allay your fears or he didn't.
Once again, I think what happened between me and Jeremy Corbyn is between the two of us. I'd also say, to be fair, if you asked the British ambassador in Israel to tell you about his meetings with this or that Israeli politician, I think he'd also refuse to answer.
What was your reaction when Shami Chakrabarti, the author of the report into anti-Semitism, was made a peer?
I'd like to stay out of that as well. Once again, I'm a foreign diplomat in this country, a guest of your government, and I don't think it's right that I go into that. I will say the following. I think by initiating the report, Labour understood that it has a problem that has to be dealt with. If the report went far enough or not far enough, I'll leave that for Labour members to decide. But I think Labour itself has admitted that there is a serious issue there and that an issue that must be addressed. I'll give you an example. I've got the Hamas Charter here. I think you've read it out previously on the program. Hamas Charter is, to be frank, openly anti-Semitic. And if you want, I can read the thing, but it calls for killing Jews as Jews. It says it's a Muslim command to kill Jewish people.
Also, I have the Likud Charter of 1999.
It doesn't, let's be clear. There's no comparison. I disagree with what you're saying. I don't think it's fair what you've just done.
No.
The Hamas Charter is an anti-Semitic document. It says the Jews were responsible for the 2 world wars. It's really like out of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It says the Jews were responsible for the communist revolutions. It talks about Jews corrupting Muslim women. It really is a racist document. You've got an organization that is homophobic, an organization that is misogynistic, an organization that is anti-Semitic. There's nothing progressive about Hamas. It's a reactionary organization. How can anyone who considers themselves progressive march alongside in solidarity with that sort of organization?
Very quick comment to you, because we need to go to a break.
Hamas Charter was written 27 years ago. And I think Hamas has traversed a long path. Today, Hamas and Haniya are talking, about a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967. So we cannot cling to the past. Now, the PLO also wanted to destroy the state of Israel. But when the peace process started, that has been rectified. We agreed that the state of Israel should be on 78% of Palestine. So we cannot keep on referring to charters and what have you and say this is the reason why. And Hamas, should not be an obstacle for you to come forward and say, let the Palestinian Authority sit down and let's finish and clinch this deal. And the outcome of that deal will prompt Hamas to accept it, whether they like it or not. But now you're giving them the opportunity, to stay in power in Gaza and to continue what they're doing. And you at the same time are trying to justify, your blockade against us in Gaza, 1.8 million Palestinians in a heavily congested area are living under dire economic conditions, saying that Hamas is bringing this calamity, while you're refusing to sit with President Abbas when he talks about moratorium of settlements and let's push this peace process forward, then Hamas will be disempowered, my friend.
Now, it is time to start your calls coming, because after 6, we're going to get your reaction to what you've heard over the last hour. We have 11 minutes to go, 0345 6060 973. And if you haven't switched on the LBC Facebook page yet, you can watch us on Facebook Live or on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk. It is now time for Mark Regev to have his Ask Me Anything. It's 5 minutes long. Your questions to Manuel Hassassian now, please.
I know it's part of my 5 minutes, but I have to respond to what the professor just said. At the time of the Oslo peace process in the early 90s, Hamas launched a wave of deadly violence against Israeli civilians, blowing up buses, killing dozens of people in the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and around the country. And then we were told Hamas is doing these attacks because they're against the peace process moving forward. Today, some people say, well, today Hamas is doing the attacks because there is no peace process. I think the truth is Hamas does these attacks because that's what Hamas is all about. We see it in these last few days. Whenever there's violence, whenever there's a knifing, a bomb, something is a shooting, Hamas is calling upon young Palestinians, kill Israelis, kill Israeli Palestinians. I can read you the quotes. And I think one of the problems we have seen is that mainstream Palestinian leadership, moderate Palestinian leadership, refuses to confront those sort of extremists. But I'll go to my questions because I only have 4 minutes left, probably.
No, we'll start your 5 minutes from now.
But this 5 minutes is partly my response also.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, let's go to the 5 minutes now, and hopefully you can get your response in a little bit later.
I would like to ask you a question. We want peace. We want reconciliation. But sometimes you do things that we just don't understand. We just had the Olympic Games in Rio. The whole international community united in memory of the Israeli athletes who were brutally murdered at the 1972 Olympic Games. The Fatah movement put out a statement. The Fatah movement of the Palestinian Authority, of President Abbas, put out a statement praising that operation, said it is recorded, demonstrates our courage and our self-sacrifice. Why are you still praising those brutal murderers?
You want an answer?
I asked the question.
Well, first of all, if you ask me, as an ambassador, I wouldn't even mention this topic, because this time and again had been used by Israel since 1972. Yes, it was a horrible act, but it cannot be taken as an excuse all the time by saying that, look, Palestinians put politics into the games. But politics runs in everything, my friend. You don't accept even the fact that our football players cross from Gaza and play in the West Bank and vice versa. You put barricades, you take them at the checkpoints and you incarcerate them.
But why do you praise the terrorists who murdered the athletes?
It's not a matter of praising. This is wrong. I'm not agreeing on the praising.
But the Fatah did it. You don't deny that Fatah did it.
Fatah is today is not a monolithic movement, my friend. There are opposition in Fatah to President Abbas's policies. So we cannot say that anybody who comes up with that represents the authority. My president and any decree that comes from the president, I am there to defend it or to criticize it. But if I want to talk about incitements,
it's my questions now. It's my questions.
Yeah, well, my question also, there are 9 Israeli cabinet ministers who have been saying things about Palestinians that if I'm allowed to quote them, you will, and these are in government. How could you want to have a peace process when the government of Netanyahu is inciting with such, despicable description of the Palestinians?
You did have 5 minutes to ask that question in your session. Mark, what's your next question?
I should ask for extra time.
No. Carry on.
We've also got an issue. Once again, we want peace, we want reconciliation, but there are some things we don't understand. We don't understand why the official website of Fatah, right, praises the Munich massacre and says it's a good thing. Today, right? Not something that happened 10 years ago. Today, they still praise that. I also don't understand why it is that the people guilty of the most heinous crimes against humanity, people who killed babies, people who throw bombs into schools and murder innocent children, why they are receiving a monthly salary from the Palestinian Authority, from the PLO. I just don't understand this. In other words, if I steal a car and go to an Israeli jail, I get nothing from the PLO. If I kill innocent civilians, I've got the figures here. If I've got a 25-year sentence for murder, I get £2,400 every month from the PA. If I've only injured someone and I'm in for less times, I still get £2,000. Why do you reward brutal terrorists? What are you saying to your own people when you pay people more money if they commit these crimes?
My answer to you is very simple. We have 7,000 political prisoners in Israeli jails today, right? And
we don't think they're political.
We have 430 children. We have 62 women there. Now, do you want to tell me that the 7,000 prisoners there their hands are all in Israeli blood?
But you are paying. Do you deny? You don't deny that you are paying.
I'm not denying. Right. Those who are in jail have families. Their homes have been destroyed. Those who are in jail are the providers of these families.
But you could say the same about car thieves and rapists. But nevertheless, the money only goes to those who have killed Israeli civilians.
Not killed, to every prisoner. You know that your prisons are privatized and there are canteens that, sell items to prisoners.
Why only to the prisoners who killed the Israelis?
No, to every prisoner.
It's not true.
No, it's
I
not
have
true.
my facts.
No.
The car thieves and the other petty criminals get nothing. Only the terrorists are getting this money because there's a special PA division that deals with prisoners, and it deals with the
because these political prisoners have lost basically. The providers have lost their homes.
But you could say the same about any prisoner. Why only the terrorists?
No, there is a difference between somebody who has committed a criminal act
can I explain?
And somebody who is patriotic,
how does
who
Israel
is fighting,
see this?
for his land. There is a big difference.
Israel sees this in this way, and you must try to understand this. We see the Palestinian government giving money to murderers of our people, murderers of innocent civilians. And then so we see a Palestinian government, why are they funding this? Is there a way that they're saying this is actually a good thing?
Your time is up. But let me, just as I followed up with a question to Mark, let me follow that up with you, Manuel. If the Israelis introduced a new policy of paying their soldiers £2,000 a month for every Hamas fighter they killed in Gaza, you would be in uproar, wouldn't you?
I mean, Israel is doing whatever wants to do. I wouldn't come and say that, Israel. I mean, these soldiers are on paid salaries. They are highly geared with high weapons and what have you.
No, but you see the parallel that I'm trying to draw here.
There is no parallel here. You cannot draw such a parallel because, that's an Israeli army. It's a state terrorism. If you want to talk about it, I can also talk about state terrorism. When F-16s bombard, innocent people in Gaza, 1.8 million are not Hamas. So you cannot put apples and oranges in the same basket.
The Israeli army. If there was any group in Israeli society that the Israeli government said, well, okay, we're going to pay you if you kill a Hamas fighter, I think the world would be outraged. I think you would be outraged. So
can I counter argue this?
Do.
DFID had concern because, DFID provides money for security, infrastructural development, and what have you. And a portion of that money goes to social welfare programs. David argued with us whether that money is going, to prisoners, to terrorists, as Mr. Regev is saying. There was a commission of inquiry, and we have proved to them that the money that goes to the Palestinian Authority goes to social welfare programs, and there are particular prisoners, not all of them, who lost, families who lost their providers and cannot really are being given an aid. We're not aiding terrorists, we're aiding families who lost their providers.
Okay, right, let's finish up. We only have 2 minutes left, so if you can bear that in mind in your final answers to these, I'm going to ask you one question each. Mark Regev, has Israel violated more UN resolutions than any other country?
The truth is, the UN has been a very hostile place for Israel because...
So the answer is yes, isn't it?
Well, there are 22 Arab countries. There's a whole bunch of other Muslim countries that vote as a bloc always against Israel, so we're always outnumbered. But if you bring up the UN, this week in New York, my Prime Minister is visiting, Prime Minister Netanyahu. President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority is going to be there too. Last year, at the rostrum, at the UN General Assembly, Prime Minister Netanyahu said to President Abbas, let's meet. Let's restart the peace process. I used to work for Netanyahu. I'm saying now to the professor, if he gives me a green light, I will ring up the Prime Minister. He will take my phone call. I know that. And I say, are you ready for a meeting in New York this week? Wednesday, Thursday, anytime, any place. I can assure you that my Prime Minister will clear his schedule to make that meeting happen, and let's get the peace process back on track. I'd like you to pass that message on to the Palestinian President. Israelis are ready to start the peace process now. We're both in New York this week. We're both there for the United Nations General Assembly. Let's get the peace process back on track.
Will you do that?
Before I answer, but I want just to remind him that President Putin has asked President Abbas to meet Mr. Netanyahu in Moscow, and he accepted it without any prior conditions.
We did too.
No, you did not. You accepted in principle, but then you said, he is busy and he is not going to meet.
That's not true.
He is not going to meet with him.
Well, what about the answer to Mark Regev's question? Will you pass that on to President Abbas?
I will pass it to President Abbas. And if I know President Abbas, he is the most pragmatic person that I have ever met in my life. And President Abbas has been serious about peace since he became the president of Palestine. And there is no doubt about his deep conviction that he knows, and he was amongst those during the second Intifada who said no militarization of the Intifada. They know it very well, but unfortunately, my president was never given the chance of being empowered by the Israelis.
If we see the two meeting in the sort of confines of the UN over the next few days, I shall remember this moment.
It happened on LBC. Final
question to you, Manuel.
Yes.
This is from Twitter. Why don't the Palestinian people get the same freedom and privileges as the Israelis?
In what sense?
Well, just day to day, the freedom to go around and do their business and the democratic freedoms.
We have democratic freedoms in our part. But I mean, the checkpoints, the blockades that we have is an impediment. But I mean, within our cities, by the way, we only control 9% of the West Bank. We don't control all the West Bank. You know that. 61% of the West Bank is controlled by the Israeli army, let alone the settlements that are controlled by settlers, provided help from the Israeli army. So, I mean, the question of mobility has been a major impediment to our economic progress and development. And I don't understand why Israel wants to strangulate the Palestinian economy and development, because he knows, Mr. Regev, that economics has been always a piston for a political intifada. When the people, are deprived from their basic necessities, they have no other choice except, to resort to violence.
We could talk for another 3 hours, probably another 3 months, actually, but we've slightly gone over our time. I'd like to thank the both of you for coming to see us. Mark Regev, Manuel Hassassian. I hope you both think it's been a fair debate. I think you've had sort of roughly equal time. I haven't got a stopwatch here, but I think it's roughly equal. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very
much. In a moment, we will be taking your calls, 0345 6060 973.